The smallest mistake can open the one door destiny has been waiting for. Before the first rays of dawn touched the towering walls of Blackthorn Citadel, Emily Carter was already awake, quietly tying the faded blue ribbon around her chestnut hair as she prepared for another day of work that she hoped no one would remember. That was how she survived. Not by being extraordinary, not by speaking louder than anyone else, but by becoming almost invisible. At 21, the white-skinned Omega Maid had spent years moving through the vast royal palace like a gentle shadow, polishing marble floors before nobles awoke, carrying silver trays heavier than they appeared, and memorizing every corridor so she could finish each task before someone noticed she had been there. Invisible servants kept their jobs. Invisible servants avoided trouble. Invisible servants lived quietly. But today, Blackthorn Citadel was anything but quiet. The Royal Moon Banquet would begin before sunset, welcoming governors, alpha leaders, ambassadors, and noble families from every corner of the Northern Territories. Hundreds of servants hurried through endless stone hallways carrying embroidered tablecloths, crystal goblets, polished silverware, and towering arrangements of white lilies. The scent of fresh bread drifted from kitchens large enough to feed an entire village, while musicians rehearsed elegant melodies somewhere beyond the eastern courtyard. Every polished window reflected the golden light of sunrise. Every banner bearing the silver wolf crest had been carefully positioned, and every servant understood the same unspoken truth. Today, perfection was not expected. It was demanded. Emily carefully balanced a wide silver tray holding 6 delicate crystal goblets as she crossed the eastern gallery, counting every measured step beneath her breath. 1, 2, 3. Never hurry. Never stumble. Never draw attention. She repeated the familiar rhythm inside her mind exactly as she had every morning since arriving at the palace. Ahead of her, several senior servants hurried past carrying folded velvet runners destined for the grand ballroom. Behind her, another maid rushed toward the kitchens, carrying fresh flowers. The palace had become a living river of constant movement. Emily shifted slightly to allow 2 footmen to pass, but at that exact moment another servant rounded the corner far too quickly. Their shoulders brushed together. Time seemed to slow. The silver tray tilted only a few inches, but it was enough. One crystal goblet slipped from its place, catching the morning sunlight before striking the polished marble floor with a clear, ringing crack that echoed through the silent corridor. Every conversation stopped. Emily stared at the shattered glass scattered across the white stone like frozen stars. Her heartbeat immediately sank. She did not need to turn around to know who had heard it. Emily Carter. The calm voice carried far more disappointment than anger. Mrs. Hawthorne, the palace's head housekeeper, approached with perfectly measured steps, her immaculate uniform untouched by the morning rush. Other servants quietly lowered their eyes, pretending to continue working while secretly listening to every word. Emily immediately knelt to gather the broken pieces, careful not to cut herself on the sharp crystal edges. "I am so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident." Mrs. Hawthorne folded her hands neatly before her. "An accident on the most important day of the year." Emily swallowed hard. "I will replace it." "With what?" the older woman asked quietly. 3 years of wages would not repay a single goblet from the royal collection. Emily lowered her eyes, unable to answer. She knew Mrs. Hawthorne was right. Silence settled heavily across the corridor until the housekeeper spoke again. "The royal steward must hear about this immediately." Emily's breath caught. The royal steward. If he decided she could no longer be trusted, her employment inside Blackthorn Citadel would end before sunset. Mrs. Hawthorne turned toward another servant. "Finish preparing the eastern gallery." Then she looked back at Emily. "Come with me." Panic swept through Emily before she could think clearly. She had never disobeyed an order. Never. Yet the fear of losing the only home she had known for years overwhelmed every careful lesson she had learned. As another group of servants crossed between them carrying enormous banquet decorations, Emily instinctively stepped backward. Then another step. Mrs. Hawthorne frowned. "Emily." Without planning it, Emily turned and ran. Her soft shoes barely made a sound across the polished marble as she hurried through unfamiliar corridors, her breathing growing faster with every turn. Behind her, Mrs. Hawthorne called her name, but the sound faded beneath the pounding of her own heartbeat. She did not know where she was going anymore. She only knew she had to hide long enough to think. She rounded one final corner into a silent wing of the palace she had never entered before. Every door stood closed except one. A massive dark wooden door rested slightly open, revealing only a narrow line of warm firelight beyond. Emily glanced once over her shoulder. The footsteps behind her were growing closer. Without another moment to decide, she slipped through the doorway and quietly closed the heavy door behind her, never realizing she had just crossed into the one chamber in the entire kingdom where no servant was ever permitted to enter. Emily remained perfectly still with her back pressed against the heavy wooden door, listening as the muffled footsteps outside continued past without stopping. Only when the corridor became completely silent did she dare release the breath she had been holding. Her trembling fingers slowly slipped away from the brass handle as she turned to face the room she had entered in blind desperation. The chamber was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Warm firelight danced across polished walnut floors, so flawless they reflected every flicker from the enormous stone fireplace. Towering bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with ancient leather-bound volumes whose worn spines hinted at generations of forgotten history. Massive windows stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, revealing endless pine forests bathed in crisp morning light beyond the castle walls. Rich midnight blue curtains embroidered with silver wolves framed the breathtaking view, while elegant furnishings filled the chamber with quiet refinement instead of unnecessary luxury. Every detail reflected discipline rather than excess. Emily slowly scanned the room, hoping she had accidentally wandered into the private office of some noble advisor. Then her gaze stopped. Above the magnificent four-poster bed hung a polished silver crest carved into dark oak. A powerful wolf beneath a crescent moon, the royal seal. Her heartbeat instantly quickened. Every servant inside Blackthorn Citadel recognized that symbol. This was not the chamber of an advisor. This was the private residence of Damian Blackwood, the Alpha King himself. Emily felt the warmth leave her face. She had heard countless stories about the ruler of the Northern Territories. Some described him as distant. Others called him wise beyond his years. Many claimed he could sense dishonesty with a single glance. Whatever the truth, every servant agreed on one thing. No one entered the Alpha King's private chamber without permission. Emily immediately reached for the door, silently praying she could leave before anyone discovered her mistake. She carefully turned the handle. Nothing happened. She pulled harder. The heavy oak door remained closed. Panic returned all at once. Had it locked behind her? She tried again, this time pressing her shoulder gently against the wood. Still nothing. Before she could think of another solution, distant footsteps echoed through the hall. Emily did not dare blink. She lay motionless beneath the carved wooden bed, her fingers tightly clasped together as every quiet sound inside the chamber seemed impossibly clear. The soft crackle of burning cedar drifted from the fireplace. Pages turned one after another somewhere above her. The Alpha King appeared completely absorbed in his morning routine, unaware that a frightened Omega Maid was hidden only a few feet away. Emily silently counted each breath, forcing herself to inhale slowly and exhale even more carefully. She had survived difficult days before. She had endured long hours of exhausting work, harsh criticism, and lonely evenings inside servants' quarters where no one remembered her name. If she remained perfectly still for only a little longer, perhaps she could leave without anyone ever knowing she had crossed the forbidden threshold. Then something unexpected happened. The comforting scent of burning cedar slowly blended with another fragrance unlike anything she had experienced before. It was clean and cool, carrying traces of fresh pine forests after autumn rain, crisp mountain air before sunrise, and the quiet warmth of polished cedar wood resting beneath moonlight. The subtle fragrance spread naturally throughout the chamber, gentle rather than overwhelming, yet impossible to ignore. Emily instinctively drew another careful breath before immediately regretting it. A strange calm settled over her thoughts. The fear pounding inside her chest softened just enough for her to notice every detail surrounding her. The room no longer felt merely silent. It felt alive. She could hear the quiet rhythm of Damian Blackwood's breathing. She could hear the faint scratch of a pen moving across parchment. Even the gentle shifting of his chair seemed unusually clear. Emily frowned slightly, confused by her own reaction. She had worked inside Blackthorn Citadel for years without ever standing close enough to the Alpha King to notice anything unusual. Why did simply sharing the same room now make every sense feel sharper than before? She carefully pressed one hand against her chest, hoping to steady the increasingly uneven rhythm of her own heartbeat. Calm down, she silently begged herself. You only need to stay hidden. Nothing more. Yet the closer she focused on calming herself, the more aware she became of the peaceful strength filling the chamber. There was no shouting, no display of authority, no intimidating command. Damien's quiet presence alone seemed to shape the atmosphere around him. It was a confidence so natural that the room itself appeared to move at his pace. Emily had heard older servants whisper that truly powerful alphas rarely needed to prove who they were. Hidden beneath the bed, she suddenly understood what they meant. She gently closed her eyes for only a moment, hoping to quiet the unfamiliar sensation. Instead, the delicate fragrance seemed even more vivid. It reminded her of safety, though she could not explain why. That realization frightened her more than anything else. She opened her eyes immediately, ashamed of the thought. This was the Alpha King. She was only a servant hiding where she should never have been. She had no right to feel comfort inside his chamber. Above her, the chair slid quietly across the polished floor. Emily's eyes widened. Black leather boots came into view once again, crossing the narrow strip of sunlight beneath the bed. One measured step, then another. They stopped beside the carved bed frame. Emily stopped breathing altogether. Every instinct inside her urged complete stillness. Damien remained standing there without speaking. His polished boots did not move. His shadow stretched across the floor until it nearly reached the edge of Emily's sleeve. Seconds passed, then another. Emily wondered if he had somehow sensed her presence. The silence grew so complete that she became painfully aware of her own heartbeat echoing inside her ears. Damien slowly turned his head, as though listening to something almost too quiet to notice. His silver-gray eyes rested thoughtfully upon the room, not searching with suspicion but with quiet curiosity. He could not explain why the chamber suddenly felt different. Something almost imperceptible had changed. Somewhere beneath the scent of cedar, polished wood, and old parchment lingered another fragrance so faint it could easily have been imagined. He remained perfectly still, thoughtful rather than alarmed. Beneath the bed, Emily silently prayed that the mysterious connection she could not understand would disappear before it revealed the impossible secret hidden only inches beneath the Alpha King's feet. The quiet stretched so long that Emily began to believe the impossible moment had passed. She remained hidden beneath the bed, every muscle aching from staying perfectly still, while the Alpha King stood only a few feet away without saying a single word. His thoughtful silence somehow unsettled her more than anger ever could. She watched the polished black boots remain motionless upon the gleaming wooden floor, as though he were listening to something beyond ordinary hearing. Emily pressed one trembling hand against her chest, silently begging her heartbeat to slow. Surely he could not hear it. Surely the thick wooden frame, the heavy blankets, and the crackling fireplace were enough to hide the tiny sounds of a frightened servant. Above her, Damien slowly exhaled. He could not explain why the chamber felt different. For years, this room had been a place of complete stillness where he could think without interruption before facing the endless demands of the kingdom. Yet this morning an unfamiliar feeling lingered just beyond his awareness, subtle enough to dismiss, yet impossible to ignore. It was not danger. It was not fear. It was simply different. Before he could examine the strange sensation further, 3 measured knocks echoed through the chamber door. "Your Majesty," a calm voice called from outside. "Commander Nathaniel Hayes requests your presence." Damien turned toward the entrance without haste. "Come in." The heavy door opened, and another pair of polished boots crossed the threshold. Nathaniel Hayes bowed respectfully before speaking. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. The Western governors have arrived nearly an hour ahead of schedule. The Royal Council requests that the final seating arrangements be confirmed before the banquet preparations continue." Damien remained quiet for a brief moment. "Tell them I will join them shortly." Nathaniel hesitated. "Is everything all right, Your Majesty?" Damien glanced once more toward the center of the chamber. "Perhaps." His answer was thoughtful rather than uncertain. "I believed I heard another heartbeat." Hidden beneath the bed, Emily felt every drop of warmth leave her face. She closed her eyes tightly, certain that everything was over. Nathaniel looked around the room with calm professionalism. The fireplace burned quietly. Morning sunlight poured through the towering windows. Nothing appeared unusual. "I do not hear anything now," he answered honestly. Damien slowly nodded. "Neither do I." His silver-gray eyes rested briefly upon the carved bed before drifting toward the bookshelves and windows. "It may simply have been my imagination." Emily almost forgot how to breathe. Nathaniel smiled politely. "You have carried many responsibilities these past weeks. Even kings deserve a few hours of rest." A faint trace of amusement crossed Damien's expression before disappearing again. "Perhaps after the banquet." Nathaniel inclined his head respectfully. "The council will be waiting." Damien collected a leather folder from the writing desk and slipped on his gloves with the same calm precision Emily had already begun to recognize. Before leaving, he paused one final time near the bed. Emily stared at the polished boots only inches away, convinced he would kneel and discover her. Instead, he simply looked across the quiet chamber once more, as though trying to remember something that remained just beyond reach. Without another word, he turned toward the door. Nathaniel stepped aside as the Alpha King left the room. The heavy oak door closed softly behind them. Silence returned. Emily did not move. She counted slowly to 100 before daring to believe they were truly gone. Even then, she remained beneath the bed for several long moments, allowing the quiet to settle completely around her. Finally, with careful movements, she crawled toward the edge of the carved frame and slowly stood. Her knees trembled from remaining hidden so long. She brushed dust from her gray dress, adjusted the folds of her apron, and hurried toward the door before fate could change its mind. As she slipped quietly from the chamber and disappeared into the empty corridor, she never noticed that the faded blue ribbon securing her chestnut hair had loosened during her escape, silently falling beneath the edge of the magnificent bed where the morning sunlight would soon reveal the only clue that she had ever been there. Emily did not stop walking until the familiar servant corridors surrounded her once again. Only then did she lean briefly against a cool stone wall, closing her eyes as she tried to steady her breathing. The impossible morning already felt like a dream she could never explain. She had hidden beneath the Alpha King's bed, escaped without being discovered, and somehow returned before anyone realized she had disappeared. She silently thanked fate for giving her another chance. There was no time to dwell on what had happened. The Royal Moon Banquet was only hours away, and every servant inside Blackthorn Citadel was expected to work without interruption. Emily quickly returned to the Eastern Service Hall, where long tables overflowed with polished silverware waiting to be arranged. Clara Bennett looked up with visible relief. "There you are. Mrs. Hawthorne has been searching everywhere." Emily forced a small smile. "I became lost while trying to find the inventory office." Clara sighed. "You should avoid the Eastern Wing today. Everyone is already nervous enough." Emily nodded gratefully. "I will." Together they resumed preparing the endless banquet tables, placing crystal glasses exactly 1 inch apart, aligning embroidered napkins with practiced precision, and lighting rows of elegant candles beneath towering chandeliers. As the morning slowly turned into afternoon, the palace transformed into a masterpiece of royal celebration. Musicians rehearsed graceful melodies that drifted through the grand corridors. Fragrant white lilies filled every reception hall, and richly dressed nobles began arriving through the castle gates in polished carriages bearing the crests of distant territories. Emily buried herself completely in her work, hoping constant movement would erase every memory of the forbidden chamber. She convinced herself that the strange silence, the mysterious connection she could not explain, and the terrifying moment when Damien paused beside the bed would all fade with time. She never realized that something important was missing. Deep inside the royal chamber, Damien Blackwood returned briefly after concluding the first council meeting of the day. The room greeted him with the same quiet order it always had. Sunlight now reached farther across the polished floor, filling the chamber with soft golden warmth. He crossed toward the writing desk, intending only to collect another set of official documents before meeting the Western governors. Halfway across the room, something near the bed caught his attention. A narrow strip of faded blue fabric rested against the dark wooden floor, almost hidden beneath the carved frame. Damien paused. He did not remember seeing it earlier that morning. Slowly, he bent down and picked it up. It was a simple ribbon, worn from years of careful use rather than decorated for appearance. Certainly not something belonging to a visiting noblewoman. He turned it thoughtfully between his fingers. The moment he did, a delicate fragrance lingered faintly upon the fabric. Lavender touched by clean linen. Fresh morning air. A quiet simplicity unlike the expensive perfumes filling the palace. Damien's thoughtful expression changed almost imperceptibly. The unfamiliar scent echoed the strange feeling that had unsettled him earlier when he believed another heartbeat had filled the chamber. He looked once more toward the space beneath the bed. The room remained perfectly empty, yet the mystery no longer felt imagined. Someone had been here. Moments later, Commander Nathaniel Hayes entered after receiving another summons. Your Majesty? Damien held out the ribbon. This was beneath the bed. Nathaniel accepted it carefully before studying the faded fabric. It belongs to one of the palace servants. Damien nodded slightly. Most likely. Nathaniel looked toward the chamber entrance. Would you like the royal guard to investigate immediately? Damien remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before answering. No unnecessary alarm. His silver-gray eyes rested once again upon the simple ribbon. Whoever entered this room did not steal anything. They left only this. Nathaniel understood immediately. A quiet search then. Discreetly, Damien replied. I want to know who lost it. Nothing more. Nathaniel bowed respectfully before leaving to carry out the instruction. Alone once again, Damien glanced toward the open windows where cool mountain air carried the scent of distant pine forests into the chamber. Somewhere beyond the countless halls of Blackthorn Citadel, the unknown owner of the faded blue ribbon continued her ordinary day, completely unaware that the smallest thing she had forgotten behind had become the one clue the Alpha King intended to follow. The afternoon sunlight slowly faded into the warm, golden glow of hundreds of candles as Blackthorn Citadel prepared to welcome the most important guests of the year. Every hallway shimmered with polished marble, silver decorations, and embroidered banners carrying the ancient crest of the Northern Territories. Servants moved quickly but quietly, each one performing familiar duties with practiced precision. Emily Carter carried fresh candles from the storage room toward the grand ballroom, determined to lose herself in work and forget the impossible events of the morning. She convinced herself that no one had seen her inside the forbidden chamber. The forgotten fear gradually settled beneath endless responsibilities. She polished crystal glasses, adjusted velvet table runners, and carefully arranged place settings exactly as Mrs. Hawthorne demanded. For a short while, everything felt almost normal again. Then subtle changes began appearing throughout the palace. 2 royal guards quietly took positions near corridors that normally remained empty. Senior stewards began confirming servant assignments more carefully than usual. Housekeepers softly reminded everyone to remain inside their designated work areas unless specifically instructed otherwise. Nothing seemed alarming by itself, yet together the small differences created an invisible tension spreading through Blackthorn Citadel. Emily noticed the changes almost immediately. While carrying fresh linen toward the western reception hall, she passed Commander Nathaniel Hayes speaking quietly with 2 palace captains. Their conversation ended the moment nearby servants approached. Later, another steward politely asked every maid to confirm where they had spent the morning before returning to banquet preparations. Emily answered truthfully enough to avoid suspicion, though a quiet uneasiness settled deep inside her heart. During a brief break, Clara Bennett lowered her voice as they arranged silver serving trays. Have you heard the rumors? Emily looked up. What rumors? Clara glanced around to make certain no supervisor stood nearby. Some people believe the royal guard is quietly searching for someone inside the palace. Emily forced herself to continue polishing a serving tray. Why? Clara shrugged gently. No one knows. Nothing has been stolen. No one has been arrested. It is all very strange. Emily nodded, pretending the conversation meant little to her, but her thoughts immediately returned to the forbidden chamber. She remembered Damien pausing beside the bed. She remembered him mentioning another heartbeat. She remembered escaping without looking back. Surely the search could not have anything to do with her. She had taken nothing. She had damaged nothing. She had only hidden for a few terrifying minutes before leaving forever. Across the palace, Damian Blackwood stood beside the tall windows of his private study, the faded blue ribbon resting quietly upon the desk before him. Nathaniel entered once more. "Your Majesty, every inquiry has remained completely discreet." Damian turned calmly toward him. "And the ribbon most likely belongs to a palace servant. There are more than 200 women assigned to banquet preparations today. Identifying its owner without unnecessary attention will require patience." Damian looked thoughtfully toward the ribbon again. "Then we will be patient." Nathaniel inclined his head respectfully. "As you wish." Outside, the first noble carriages rolled through the castle gates as evening settled over Blackthorn Citadel. Emily straightened her simple gray dress, completely unaware that the quiet search unfolding around her had never been about punishment. It had become something far more unexpected. The Alpha King simply wanted to find the unknown owner of a forgotten ribbon whose quiet presence had somehow remained in his thoughts long after she had disappeared. The Royal Moon Banquet began beneath a ceiling sparkling with crystal chandeliers that reflected thousands of warm lights across polished marble floors. Noble families from every corner of the Northern Territories filled the magnificent ballroom in elegant gowns and finely tailored formal coats, their conversations blending with the graceful melodies performed by a royal string ensemble. Long banquet tables overflowed with silver candle holders, embroidered runners, and carefully arranged white lilies whose delicate fragrance drifted gently through the enormous hall. Emily Carter quietly moved among the guests, carrying a polished silver tray filled with crystal glasses, reminding herself to keep her eyes lowered and her footsteps silent. She had spent years mastering the art of becoming invisible, and tonight, more than ever, she needed that skill. The strange rumors of a quiet search throughout the palace still lingered in her thoughts, but hours had passed without anyone questioning her. She slowly allowed herself to believe that the frightening morning had finally been left behind. Then the musicians stopped playing. One by one, conversations faded into respectful silence as the towering doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Every noble guest rose to greet the ruler of the Northern Territories. Damian Blackwood entered the hall with calm confidence, dressed in an elegant midnight blue royal coat embroidered with silver thread that shimmered beneath the candlelight. Palace guards followed several respectful steps behind, while Commander Nathaniel Hayes remained quietly at his side. Damian acknowledged the assembled guests with little more than a composed nod before making his way toward the royal dais. Emily kept her attention fixed upon the tray she carried, determined not to look toward the Alpha King. She only needed to deliver the glasses to the western banquet table before returning to the servant corridors. Nothing more. Yet as Damian crossed the ballroom greeting governors and visiting Alpha leaders, he suddenly slowed. The countless fragrances filling the grand hall should have blended into one indistinguishable atmosphere of flowers, polished wood, expensive perfumes, and candle wax. Instead, one familiar trace quietly reached him through the crowd. Lavender touched by fresh linen. Clean morning air. Simple, gentle, instantly recognizable. Damian stopped speaking in the middle of a conversation. Nathaniel noticed the change immediately, but remained silent. The Alpha King slowly turned his head, following the delicate fragrance as though an invisible thread guided him through the ballroom. It was the same quiet scent lingering upon the faded blue ribbon now resting safely inside his coat pocket. Emily suddenly felt an unexpected stillness settle around her. Without understanding why, she looked up. Across the crowded ballroom, beyond rows of noble families and glittering chandeliers, her eyes met Damian's silver-gray gaze. Time seemed to pause. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Damian's calm expression softened almost imperceptibly with quiet recognition rather than surprise. Emily's heart skipped as memories of the forbidden chamber rushed back all at once. She instinctively lowered the tray slightly, afraid she had somehow revealed herself without saying a single word. Around them, nearby nobles gradually noticed that the Alpha King had stopped walking. Curious whispers spread from one table to another as guests quietly followed his line of sight. Emily stood frozen beneath the countless lights of the grand ballroom, surrounded by people who had never truly noticed her before. For the second time that day, destiny had quietly placed her directly in the Alpha King's path. This time, however, there was nowhere left to hide. The silence inside the grand ballroom lingered for several long seconds as Damian Blackwood calmly changed direction, leaving a circle of influential governors and respected alpha leaders behind. Every measured step brought him closer to the quiet Omega Maid standing motionless beside the banquet table. Emily Carter lowered her eyes immediately, her hands tightening around the polished silver tray as she fought to steady her breathing. She could feel the attention of hundreds of guests slowly shifting toward her, though no one yet understood why the Alpha King had interrupted royal protocol for an ordinary servant. Whispered conversations spread gently through the hall. Lady Evelyn Ashcroft, seated among the highest-ranking noble families, watched the unexpected scene with growing confusion while several aristocrats exchanged questioning glances. Emily slowly placed the silver tray upon the nearest table before lowering herself into a respectful curtsy. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice almost lost beneath the quiet crackling of hundreds of candles. Damien stopped only a few feet away. He regarded her calmly, studying the familiar chestnut hair, now loosely gathered after the hurried morning, then noticing the empty place where a ribbon should have been. Without speaking immediately, he reached inside the inner pocket of his royal coat. Emily's heart sank. When his hand emerged, the faded blue ribbon rested neatly across his open palm. A quiet wave of surprise moved through the nearest guests. Emily instinctively raised one trembling hand toward her hair before realizing what had been missing all afternoon. Her eyes widened with disbelief. Damien held the ribbon toward her. "I believe this belongs to you." Emily looked at the ribbon before slowly lifting her eyes toward the Alpha King. She understood at once where he had found it. There was no reason to hide the truth any longer. Carefully accepting the ribbon with both hands, she bowed her head. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Thank you." Damien's expression remained composed. "You were inside my chamber this morning." Emily closed her eyes briefly before answering. "Yes, Your Majesty." The surrounding whispers immediately grew louder before quickly fading again as everyone waited for the king's response. Emily drew a careful breath. "I entered only because I was frightened after making a mistake during the banquet preparations. I did not know whose room it was until I was already inside. When I realized where I had gone, I tried to leave, but I heard someone approaching. I hid because I was afraid. I never intended to disrespect you or your home." Her voice remained quiet but sincere. Every word carried simple honesty without excuses. Damien listened without interrupting. When she finished speaking, the ballroom remained completely still. Many nobles quietly expected the frightened servant to be dismissed from palace service before the evening ended. Instead, Damien slowly removed the magnificent midnight blue ceremonial cloak resting across his shoulders. Before anyone could understand his intention, he gently placed the royal cloak around Emily's shoulders. The rich fabric settled softly over her plain gray servant dress, creating a striking contrast that left the nearest guest speechless. Emily looked up in complete surprise, unable to understand why the ruler of the kingdom would show such unexpected kindness to someone of her station. Damien's calm voice carried clearly across the silent hall. "Fear is not a crime. Honesty deserves respect." His silver-gray eyes briefly swept across the gathered nobles before returning to Emily. "No servant who speaks the truth will be humiliated under my roof." No one challenged his words. Even Lady Evelyn lowered her gaze without speaking. Emily carefully held the royal cloak close, feeling gratitude replace the fear that had followed her throughout the entire day. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel, she realized that the Alpha King had not searched for the owner of the forgotten ribbon to deliver punishment. He had searched because he believed the truth deserved to be heard. The grand ballroom slowly came alive once again as musicians resumed their graceful performance and conversations cautiously returned beneath the glow of countless crystal chandeliers. Yet something had quietly changed inside Blackthorn Citadel. Emily Carter stood where she was, still wrapped in the Alpha King's royal cloak, the soft weight of the midnight blue fabric resting gently across her shoulders. Only that morning she had believed her future could disappear because of one broken crystal goblet. She had expected punishment, humiliation, or dismissal. Instead, she had been met with understanding she never imagined possible. Damian Blackwood regarded her for one final thoughtful moment before addressing the assembled court. "Emily Carter entered my chamber by accident while acting out of fear, not dishonor. The matter ends here. His calm voice carried naturally throughout the magnificent hall without the slightest trace of anger. No one within this palace will question her integrity again. A respectful silence followed. Even those who privately disagreed understood that the Alpha King's judgment was final. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I understand." When she turned toward Emily, her expression had softened in a way the young Omega Maid had never witnessed before. "Return to your duties when you are ready." Emily quietly nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you." Clara Bennet smiled from across the ballroom, unable to hide her relief, while several palace servants exchanged warm glances with the young maid they had worked beside for years without truly knowing. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel, Emily did not feel invisible. She carefully retied the faded blue ribbon into her chestnut hair before folding the royal cloak respectfully over her arms and returning it to Damien with both hands. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will remember your kindness for the rest of my life." Damien accepted the cloak with a slight nod. "Then remember something else as well." Emily looked up. "Never allow fear to convince you that your worth depends upon another person's opinion." His words settled gently inside her heart, becoming a lesson she would carry long after the evening ended. Their eyes met one final time across the candlelit ballroom. Neither of them spoke another word, yet both understood that an ordinary morning mistake had quietly changed the course of two lives. The forgotten ribbon had become more than a simple piece of fabric. It had become the first thread connecting two people from entirely different worlds through honesty, compassion, and unexpected destiny. Outside the towering windows, the moon rose above the endless pine forests surrounding Blackthorn Citadel, bathing the ancient kingdom in soft silver light as music, laughter, and hope filled the palace once more. Some stories begin with grand victories. Others begin with a frightened servant opening the wrong door. And sometimes the smallest mistake leads to the greatest blessing of all. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with friends who love heartfelt alpha and omega fantasy stories. We would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were Emily, would you have hidden beneath the bed, or would you have stepped forward and faced the Alpha King from the very beginning?